think we're going to get started with our workshop here. Eric and I are co-hosting. And the way this is going to work, our four panelists are going to introduce themselves, give a little bit of a backstory, and then there's going to be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions. Okay, we'll start with Lukasz.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everybody. My name is Lukasz Sznadjer. You can call me Lukasz, my English version of the name. So I'm with this community for quite a while. I started very early on as a PhD student that I've done in Dr. Sobczak lab in Poland. But maybe I will take one step back. I spent time in the three labs, and each lab had a major impact on how and why I do science. So the first one was Professor Krzyżosiak lab in Poland. That's the guy who in 97, they described that CUG repeats form a hairpin structure. So I really thank him for making an environment that really psyched me in science. I was really excited. I went to the lab and I realized, hey, this is exciting, right? So that's why I even considered doing PhD. I joined the Dr. Sobczak lab in Poland, and what he taught me, it was about the rigor in science and I would say critical thinking, right? Then I joined to Maurice Swanson lab, where I learned what does it mean to have a big picture and how to zoom out and be strategic with the science. Yes, right now I am an assistant professor at University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
My name is Johanna Hamel, and I'm at the University of Rochester, and I'm now associate professor on a scholarship track, which is the middle thing between being a real researcher in the lab and a clinician. So my path started in Germany. So I've seen three big university centers, I guess, from the inside, because I went to medical school in Germany at a medical school that had a focus on neuromuscular diseases, which is probably the reason why I turned back to it. And then went to Berlin and started German residency and did some research in visual cognition there. And then wanted to do more neuromuscular because I liked seeing those patients inpatient. And then that wasn't really the path there. And there were some issues with the lab. Anyway, so I just gave it a shot and applied to a few residency programs in the US. And I think my first part of my path, I think, is really characterized by determination versus drift, and maybe more drift than determination, because I did a lot of things that don't seem like they're straightforward, or they don't really go after one goal. And that is, for example, I spent 6 weeks on an Indian reservation in Montana with the Blackfeet tribe and did a rotation there. And I think that's the reason why I went back to the US, because I liked how people were trained and how people worked. And that wasn't very career oriented, but made a huge impact for the rest of my life. And so there are several things. For example, I also spent 6 weeks in Zambia doing nutritional neuropathy research, which didn't move my career forward in terms of getting papers or getting a grant or something. But again, I think I had very important lessons there. So anyway, there are some drift examples, plenty of those. And the determination part was that I think I found a great team in Rochester. And the bottom line, what I believe is that it's all about the people. The disease is important. And of course, I always liked multisystemic diseases. I never really wanted to give up my interest in the brain. This is why myotonic dystrophy is a good match for me to spend time with. But on the other hand, a lot of decisions aren't really focused on content or facts, but really on the people you meet and the people who support you. And so really finding the right mentor, and it's not just one, but the right mentors and the people you want to hang out with and spend so much time with, and who don't just make you do the work that they need you to do, but to really look at what is this helping you, and is this moving your career forwards, and don't tell you just what to do, but they ask you questions so that you come up with the answer. Those kind of qualities in a mentor, I think I found in Rochester, and then that's why I stayed there.
Hi, I'm Jana Jenquin. I'm currently a senior scientist with Novartis, which was formerly Therapeutics. I actually really like the idea of determination versus drift. I was talking earlier about how I feel like a lot of my career have been led by by like my love of science and just interest in what I was doing. And that sort of led my decision making, which I don't know if that's always the best, but I think really early on, like after my undergrad, I started working for the American Red Cross in their like national testing lab. And I was like, oh my gosh, my first real job. I'm so excited. But it was just remedial, like loading samples and pushing start, which was pretty brutal. And so I started working for another company I was working as an analytical chemist for a pesticide residue company. So I was doing a lot of like liquid extraction and GCM SMS and all of that, which it was a really small company. And so I started doing quality assurance work as well and writing a bunch of SOPs and boring stuff. But I was pretty good at it because I had a lot of attention to detail. And I just kept with it. And I did all these trainings and I was a lead internal auditor and all this stuff. And through networking, I met some people from other private labs and then started a consulting company where I would go in and help build out like information management systems for labs and working with their like statistics around their QA and building out internal auditing systems. And I just kept doing it because I was like, oh, this is great. I'm like meeting a bunch of people and I'm like, now I have employees and this is so much fun. And then all of a sudden I realized I hated quality assurance work because I wasn't actually doing any science and I was working myself to death. And so I just decided to go back for my PhD. And I remember when I was all the places where I got interviews, I went everywhere because I was like, oh, they're flying me out for interviews. This will be so fun. And I remember I went to University of Oregon was not the school I was planning on going to. Andy's heard this story before. It was not where I was planning on going, but I was like, oh, I'll go. It'll be fun. And I met Andy. So I did my PhD with Andy Berglund. And I remember at the time that I didn't even know RNA could mediate disease. I had no idea. I had done like signal transduction work as an undergrad. And I just remember really loving the work and loving the lab and falling in love with the thought of being able to help a community. And then Andy told me, oh, by the way, I'm moving to Florida. So I moved with him to Florida, which was a lot of fun. And I did all like small molecule therapeutics with him. And then the funny thing is that when I graduated, I was like, I'm going into industry. That's what I'm doing right away. And I remember I was like close to graduating and was doing a brief postdoc with Andy. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to put out some applications. And I had applied to Pfizer for their rare disease unit. And then Eric Wang came to me and said, hey, do you want to do a postdoc with me around gene therapy approaches? And at the time I had no experience with gene therapies. And so I was like, yeah, actually I do, which was really great because working in Eric's lab was crazy because it was over COVID. So everything was shut down and I was essential lab staff. But the great thing about that work is that it led into the work and the start of Kate Therapeutics. And so I had been at Kate now for 4.5 years. And so was at the ground level and to be able to see the company grow and then obviously now be acquired by Novartis was pretty cool. It's where I am now.
Let me start with saying 4 things. So don't listen to me. The other thing I want to say is I really strongly dislike stupidity and hamster wheels. And I am ultimately motivated by rare diseases. So my career started in Germany as a chemistry and physics. And then I got one of those rare permissions to also study medicine. Because I was young, I came to the States for a year on a Fulbright and German academic exchange scholarship. And as life plays, I decided to stay, do my PhD at the University of Utah. I had a crazy mentor, a mathematician, and a very famous geneticist. And he was really influential in my career. Then late during graduate study, I made an unusual discovery in a common disease area, patent, and we started a company. Fast forward, the economic crisis hit. We were at the phase of trying to raise a large Series A. And the angel investor said, we are selling the technology. And so we had a small exit. And then the VC firm reached out to me and said, we like your analytical mind. We would really like to work with you on how to evaluate technology for investments. At that point, I paused because, as I said, I don't like hamster wheels. And even though I was, from an early career perspective, pretty successful in academia, I didn't want to go deeper and deeper into molecular interaction and not seeing what's important for patients. This was reaffirmed when a very close friend died of cystic fibrosis, and I saw her, how there were at the time no treatments, and this really pushed me into this direction of rare diseases. My mentor in venture capital also told me, he said, you're too weak in finance. You need to, if you want to do that, you need to hit the books and the library. So I got an MBA. And so I did three things at the same time. I was still on faculty in Utah. I was an MBA student, and I was an advisor to university venture funds in their life science division. So it was a pretty cool experience, and I saw all the deals. Fast forward, I graduated. Now I want to get a principal job. And the economic crisis was at its peak, and I had an offer with the Nestle venture capital fund in Vantages. I flew to the Bahamas, and I wanted a job in Geneva, and I got offered a job in the Bahamas. I didn't want to go to the Bahamas, so I didn't do that. Because of my passion for rare diseases, the opportunity arose to lead the newborn screening program for the state of Utah. The only mandate I got there was fix the program. And within a couple of years, we took this program from a very rundown state to a very competitive and extremely well-funded project enterprise. So state of the art. We were the first program to implement SMA population-wide screening in the States. So pretty successful. The next crisis hit, COVID. The governor came and said, you did this in newborn screening, you would take on COVID testing. So in relatively short time, my second job was to scale up our COVID testing from 100 to thousands of tests per day, and we managed that. COVID was over. They came again and said, we want you to take on the leadership of the public health lab. I said, I'm not really interested in this. Start a search. I don't want to do that. They were not successful, and they said, can you do that? Please do it. So I said, okay, let's try, and I commit to 2 years. I did that, but I realized I don't really like drunk people, and I don't like toxicology testing, and I also don't like PFAS testing in drinking water. Being true north, I said, okay, I want to return to the rare disease space, and I didn't quite go to industry. I applied to foundation, and I looked at 3 organizations I could have joined: the MDA and their MOVER program, and then Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation, and the Cure Alzheimer Fund. And I like the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation because of the real interesting challenge of emerging diagnostics, emerging treatments, right, and a lack of very large and very centralized patient registries. So after all the interviews, when I got the offer, I asked Tanya, can I come to the conference? And I came to the conference in 2023 to check it out, and I liked it, and here I am.
I'm an undergrad, and my question is simple but broad. So if you go back to your undergrad days, what advice would you give yourself?
I think the big thing is deciding if you want to do a higher education, right? Or if you want to just go into the workforce, and making that decision. I think one of the key players is thinking about where you want to end up, right? So like, what's your dream job? And then, can I get there without a higher degree, or can I not? I think the other thing is nothing is life or death. Don't take things too seriously. Have fun in what you're doing. If you do a PhD or a master's or anything like that, enjoy it. I think people really get bogged down, especially in their PhD, and they think it's really stressful and that everything's going to end if they don't do their quals really well. But everybody wants you to succeed, right? Your committee, everybody, they want you to succeed. And I think just breathe easy and know that if you make a decision, you can always change it, right? You're not committed to that one thing, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Like, I think it's so important to make mistakes. So don't beat yourself up about that kind of stuff.
You should make mistakes.
Yes.
Otherwise,
A lot of them.
you're not trying enough
A
things.
lot of them.
Maybe ask yourself what you're passionate about and pause and think and pause more and then follow your passion.
I feel like young people are so interested in getting on with it and like being done on this fixed timeline. And that is, I think, a mistake because you just get hung up on trying to finish something, not enjoying the moment, as you were saying. And so if it takes an extra year to do a PhD, you learn a bunch of stuff, that's great. Like it's okay to do a 6-year PhD or even longer, as long as you're always continuing and bettering yourself, and then are healthy.
So we have a lot of students in the lab that are always interested into going into industry, and it's very hard for people like us that are very like academically focused to guide them. Do you have any suggestions about what we can do to help these students to reach out more to you, or what can they actually do to get like a foot into industry? Do you think we should tailor their projects more to be something therapeutically relevant? Does that matter? Doing more outreach internships in industry? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think taking advantage of internships is really good. You can talk about the experience and give advice and do all of that, but I think really being in it gives you an idea. And I also think that internships are really good stepping stones, right? Having that experience and then either staying with that company and being on as a permanent employee and then moving on from there. I think it's a pretty, I don't want to say easy, but it's a way to get your foot in the door. I think the other thing that is really important, and I think initially that was a hard transition for me into industry, is that like everyone talks about, oh, you go into industry, it's good money. I think that's what people glamorize it in some ways. But I think you really have to ask yourself, do you want freedom in your research? And not that you don't have it in industry, especially at a startup. I had a lot more freedom in my research when I started at Kate. But I think as you move on, industry is great because it's laser focused, right? So you achieve a goal very quickly and you have a team that is driving forward towards a common goal. However, you might see a lot of interesting stuff along the way that you kind of want to research and you can't. So I think asking yourself if that's something that you want. It's also okay to say, you know what, I want to go to work, I want to do my job, and I want to go home. And there's a spot for that, right? So I think figuring out what drives you. I also think that soft skills are really important. And I think it's something we don't really talk about a lot, but just interaction with colleagues, how to convey ideas concisely and clearly, speaking, presentations, written communication, all of those things I think are really valuable because we can all do the science, right? It's what we do every day. And so learning those skills I think is really important.
I have like literally little to say about it because I never worked for industry, like pharmaceutical industry, but I interviewed there. And related to the previous question, I can say this. I think it is quite okay to not know and wonder. And I think that's the part of the process and part of being human. And although I sit here today, I still wonder if I'm like, is that this? And that's supposed to be different. Why is it like that? So there is always like the expectation and reality coming, and then there's a gap of knowledge and then learning, right? So I had this like opportunity to go back on the job market, and I interviewed at companies and applied and interviewed in the companies, nonprofit and academic. And what I learned through this process is that it all comes to the values that I have. And I believe with my values, I could probably do every job, but from whatever reason, this job that I have right now is the closest to my values because I value a lot, like touching people's lives, interactions, that's why I'm here. And academia is giving a lot of that, to be with people, to interact with them, to impact lives, right? I have a large population of students, and they very often are coming, they're asking those questions. What about this? What about that? And I think it is a privilege to have an impact on people's lives, especially when they're like wonder I can offer some guidance for that. So I cannot really say about like how good is in industry because I've never been there, but academic life is good. I would say last thing, I realized that lately that being a professor is a job, but being an academic is a lifestyle. And I really like this lifestyle.
And maybe just a couple things to follow up on both of those questions. I think the skills that are important in academia and in industry, learning how to critically think. I mean, this is a skill for everyone. Our world needs more capacity to critically think, especially now. We need the ability to communicate and present well, to be able to understand others, to be able to empathize with others. And so all of these types of skills are trained during the PhD, and they're going to serve you well regardless of where you go. I think this question of how to connect, I think this forum, this way that we're running the set MDF, I think there's a lot of advantages. That there could be ways in which we continue this in future years and build that network more fully to connect street with academics and build that network. One last thing, I think Lukasz hit on this. There's Japanese a phrase called ikigai. Basically, to figure out what is going to really satisfy you is you want to find the intersection of three areas. The first area is, what are you good at? The second is, what do you enjoy? And the third is, what does the world need? So what are you going to get paid, right? So finding that intersection will likely align with finding a role for you that's going to be very satisfying.
Hi. So I don't really have a question, but I have mentored a lot of people. And I just want to go back to the mentorship question because I have students that have been pre-med and I've had students that don't know what they want to do. And then I have students that wanted to go into industry. And I think the common theme for all of that was just sitting and listening and having empathy for that kind of thing. I'm not personally interested in industry or pre-med, but I know that there's a reason that we have those people that need to address that. So just sometimes listening, going over their CVs with them or listening to a concern that they have and trying to find those connections and help bring them to that person and say, hi, I don't know anything about this. Can you help them, please? And being that mentor that is okay with acknowledging that you don't know everything. You can find the people that do know everything about that thing. Be social, be empathetic to your students. That's what has worked for me a lot. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate this. My question was more about if you could pick one lesson that you've learned throughout your career thus far, would you mind sharing it with the group and what you've learned from it?
Be curious. And if you don't get it, don't pretend. Say, repeat.
Growing up a know-it-all, I learned that people don't really like that. I think just being humble about the work that you do and asking questions. And I think ego can be a dangerous thing as a scientist. And so I think it's really important, and being able to say, I don't know, and like figuring out who does, right? And being like, hey, can we talk about this? And I have found throughout even industry, academia, people love talking about what they know. And so I think you can very easily get help with what you're doing. I also tell people, don't reinvent the wheel. You'll save a lot of time if you have a really good team and people around you that can help.
I guess there are several lessons learned, but I would go on the other end of the spectrum and say have a little more ego, because if specifically you grow up having not enough of it, I would say confidence. So just to give an example, I'm not from a family with physicians, let alone scientists. I didn't have the role model that this is where you're going to end up and don't worry, it's easy and mom and dad are doing it every day. That wasn't how I grew up. And then when it's aligned with someone who is questioning oneself all the time and very self-critical, that can be actually a barrier to doing things and trusting that you can do it. And so, I did a lot of things. I studied philosophy during medical school, and I really enjoyed it, and I think it was good. But part of it was also that I thought, oh, I can't do any lab work because I'm not talented. And I won't be able to do that. And so all these, I should have talked to people, and I was hesitant to talk to people. So ask as many people as you like. And if you don't like the answer, just ask more people and trust yourself that you can explore avenues that seems like a less traveled path in your close environment. Yeah.
Life is full of uncertainties. And that's just the part, right? Anxiety is a part of life. And just don't quit if things are hard, but quit when they're stupid. That's it. Tolerate unknown.
A couple common themes there. I think this feeling, I think both Andy and Jana mentioned this, when you don't know something, don't pretend. I think this is enriched in this group because our goal as scientists is to figure out, to go to a space where nobody knows the answer, right? So that's a very uncomfortable space to be in. And our society tells us you want to go away from that. But actually, that's a feeling to remember and capture and be comfortable to be uncomfortable in that situation, because that's exactly where you want to be. We want to be in a place where we don't know, nobody knows, because that's where we're going to make new discoveries. I think there's this tendency for especially new students to run away from that feeling, but actually that's exactly where you want to be. Then the other theme I think that came out was this confidence theme, where I get the sense that a lot of you in the audience are looking at people who have reached a place that you might aspire to be, and you have a vision for what you want your future to look like, and that the barrier isn't necessarily your competency, probably. It's more your belief in your ability to achieve that goal. And so I see this all the time in many of my own students, and I've experienced this myself with my mentors, where that your students or the people in your lab are actually a lot more capable of things than they think they are. And so examining what it is about your perception of yourself or what the barriers are, I think that's really critical to unwrapping what is taking that confidence away. Is something actually about your abilities, or is it something that's more of a perception? I think that's clarifying. I think a lot of you probably are more capable of what you think, and you've been through that.
So I've heard a lot of people today talking about how a lot of DM research is going away from looking at the muscular aspect and more like the nervous system and kind of the parts that aren't immediately clinically diagnosable. And I know that sometimes that can't be financially beneficial or financially profitable. So I want to ask, as researchers, how do you find the balance between doing the research that will support a patient versus doing the research that will be funded? Like, where do you find that balance?
It's always finding the balance in what you're passionate about, and make sure you write it and sell it that way that it gets funded, because you don't want to do a project that seems sexy and hot and people just, are throwing money at it. You will have to do the work and spend every day thinking about this. And if it's not something that is inspiring your creativity or your passion, then I wouldn't do it. Then maybe do something else. But that's how I look at it as a clinician, because I think we sometimes don't think enough about recruiting clinical researchers into myotonic dystrophy field, and we need more of them. And I think a lot of the ideas come from the clinic, and actually our patients generate these ideas, and then it's our job to pick them up and form them into a project and answer the question. And that's where the passion comes from. And in terms of funding, there are different resources. So I'll give you an example. Then you just go to a different funding agency or foundation or something. So for example, we did a women health study, and we wanted to look at understudied topics of smooth muscle involvement in myotonic dystrophy patients. And we wrote a grant, a collaborative group with OB and a sexual function specialist and all that. And an all-women team, we thought this is really, we submitted to two funding agencies. And one was, for example, an OB foundation, and they funded it's a small pilot, but anyway, they funded it, and the CTSI didn't because they had all these criticisms about little things. And so it's just a matter of where to go and get your ideas pushed through, that you can do the work that you're passionate about.
So you could wrap it up with a statement: fashion comes and goes, right? You've seen that at a conference here, right? Everyone is focusing on these ASOs, and we have 3 companies doing exactly the same things. If you look to Darren's presentation in Human Genetics, or if you follow closely the SMA story, even with these treatments, life is not over. No, progress raises more questions, right? And if you follow your passion, right, and if you follow your interests, that's longevity.
I think it's a mistake to always go after questions that you think are going to help people, because you don't really know what's going to help people. Like, I think you want to go after what interests you, and then probably at some point, knowledge is going to help the people, right? Like, people are doing all sorts of really interesting research and they didn't know at the time that it was going to be useful. So I think it's more important to do stuff that you really like than to always shoehorn yourself into trying to do translational research.
So for the clinicians, because you spend all this time in residency and you do a lot of stroke and inpatient and all that, and you get little exposure to the real interesting thing, then I often get the question, well, but I don't know what to do and I don't know what to study and I don't know the project. And so some people get shut down right there and they're not researchers. Maybe, why don't you go to private practice because you don't have an idea, you don't have a vision for the next 10 years. I've heard this now over and over in the last couple of years from residents that are actually interested in research. And there I would say, because I do tell them I didn't have a 10-year vision either at that point. And I think the most important part is to get involved and just do something. And you don't have to have the ideas. You haven't seen all the patients. They haven't given you the ideas. So you just have to go in clinic and see the patients. You have to do the study visits to meet patients, to see the disease, to get as much experience as possible and get involved into existing research projects. And then do the work, look at the data, learn all the skills, and then you'll come up with your own ideas because they will just naturally come to you. It's easy to get shut down early because you're not having the next nice written paragraph on your CV. It's a natural evolution, and particularly for clinicians.
The same thing is true at the bench. Just get some data before you start trying to think of, yeah.
Yeah, and actually just one last follow-up. If the data doesn't make sense, that's actually an interesting thing, and you should figure it out and take the time to figure it out. Make sure it's reproducible. But yeah, that's sometimes where the interesting science is.
We all got assigned mentors and mentees for this. Don't be afraid as you're going through your life to shift up your mentors. Sometimes mentors aren't leading by great example. Sometimes we're just older, not wiser. And you can have a mentor for different aspects of your career and your life, and you need to pick them for when you need them. And if all you're getting is negative, feedback and discouragement, that's not a good mentor pair for you. And you got to find somebody else. And I think the dive in and just do is the way you learn. So I highly encourage that.
I want to piggyback on this because that's exactly my lesson. Although I'm sitting here, I have like mentors, and the more I progress in career, I have more mentors. And there are different aspects of the mentorship that I have right now. Maybe I require a little bit of less mentoring in science, but I require mentoring in how do I lead a group? How can I become a manager for the people? How can I serve better? And with time, I see like people are different and they're coming with different strengths and weaknesses. It is unrealistic to expect that one person will feel all my needs. And I have a team of mentors, and I'm in a good relation with all my previous mentors. I use their advice very often, and I have new mentors which are covering different aspects. And I have mentors who are not academics, but they run companies, and they're telling me, hey, this is how I would do that. So I think this is like constant process of learning, and people around who are like having more years and more experience are very useful. And one thing that really surprised me is I almost never heard no when I reach out to someone. Hey, can you help me with that? Almost never no. It's just, yeah, let's find the time and let's figure that out.
And the one thing about requesting a mentor, don't be afraid to send the email that second time.
So I want to follow up what Jacinda was saying, and that is absolutely 100% true, and it's more common than we think. So before the newborn screening symposium we did at the RNA Institute, I spent a day with students talking about career. And the most common topic was, how do I talk with my mentor about different non-scientific topics in terms of getting guidance about life, making these seemingly life or death decisions? Maybe that's something we should do, right, as a community to build a network, what Lukasz said about making friends, right, and establishing contacts. We are comfortable talking about these things that are not project related.
I just wanted to say it's really great to hear all the description of your careers and pathways. And I think one of the take-home messages is always to start off with what you said, which is be curious in your career and don't worry, especially early on, if you shift, because every experience that you have brings you skills that you will take to, and sometimes some of the best things that you can bring to the field that you finally really progress in are the things that you think were completely unrelated, that you learned in a completely unrelated field. And so each one of these experiences that you have is important, and you just keep building on it. You never know when you're going to go back to having to do something that you did as an undergraduate, and you're like, oh, so glad I did that before.
The question that I'm going to put forward, I would not say that only in my mind. I'm hearing a lot for a lot of postdocs around, so I'm giving it to the board. Funding is always a very critical component, integral part of the research, no matter wherever you are standing in your career. But specifically when you're a early career scientist looking forward to establish a career in academia, being in postdoc position, funding play a very critical role. It can give you that boost to step up and take that milestone. Now, the situation is quite obvious. Everyone it's getting more and more challenging with time, which is creating a lot of panic. And like I would say, if I'm speaking from on behalf of all other postdocs, early career scientists, they are kind of in a very uncertain and in a challenging situation. The other thing I would say that some of you, as I heard from background, it belong to an international background. So being an international is another layer when you look for the funding specifically for NIH and other big funding agencies, because there's a very specific restrictions that come over, which is no one's fault. That's not a part of debate. But I would really like to hear from you that all of you are sitting at the different positions, have a different exposures, might be come through the challenges during your career. What you want to say to someone like me or anyone who is connected with me or listening to you is that how to cope up with those challenges. Keep yourself self-motivated while you're also looking forward to a next step moving in your career. And what are the different resources that you could suggest we should look forward up to and start exploring in these challenging situations? I'd really appreciate the suggestion. Thank you.
So the first thing is, right, that we all do good work, right? That's the lowest common denominator, so to speak. I firmly believe when a door closes, another one will open. And we as a community can use the situation to look at other models. For example, my favorite model is the CF Foundation, right? Or now what we see with the Cure Angelman Group, how they managed, for example, to raise significant amount of money, for example, through venture philanthropy, to generate completely independent revenue streams and revenue forms to support drug development in their diseases. So there's first a shock, and then calm down, think, and then there will be a solution. It's not the end of the world, right? And I firmly believe we will come out of this stronger and we'll come out of it better.
I think in grim times, that one of the things to remember is everybody's in the same boat. And I think as a community, things will shift and we'll find other means and other avenues. Research isn't going to stop, right? We're going to continue on. We're going to find a way. And so, yeah, I think just trying to be clever and finding other avenues and getting groups together, talking, right? Brainstorming, what can we do? How can we change this? I think using communities like this is really important.
So I have a couple of things, because I like your positive view on things, but I wish I could think that positively about the situation. First of all, I just want to say about the question international and funding restrictions, being an international person and a non-permanent resident. I had a painful experience with that, because until just recently, I was a non-resident alien or a non-permanent resident. And so no access to career development awards except the K-99, which isn't really given to MDs generally. And I tried that route 2 times. And that didn't work, and this got close, but not successful. A lot of work, a lot of effort wasted just because of my visa status. And so going other avenues, on one hand, if you're an IMG, you have to work harder, because you always have to, I also wasn't eligible for the T32 training fellowship. So I had to write my own grant as a clinical fellow, full-time employed, to get funding for a research fellowship. That maybe sounds bad, but it was also an opportunity, because I had to get involved earlier than others. It wasn't as comfortable, but it pushed me. And so that was good. And also the mentor relationship, because you can't do it without a strong mentor generally.
And then the foundations, right? They saved me because providing support. And I think they've provided a lot of support for my IMG colleagues. And I think that's incredibly important. And I always made that pitch to the foundation because if you look around, who's doing the work as clinical researchers, there's a high proportion of international graduates. If you look at MDA, I was looking around the room, who's doing the clinical work in research? It's a lot of foreigners like me. I encourage that. I think if we want to have a pipeline of clinician researchers, we need to keep it open for foreigners and provide these early funding opportunities. And then the second point, so thank you, MDF and MDA. The second point is that I wonder about, well, should we just wait and watch and hope for the best? Or is there something we need to do? Because sometimes the anxiety gets better and the fear if you do something about it. And I don't exactly know what. And because I'm not a citizen, I shouldn't be too active if I want to travel in and out. But I'm just wondering, what should we as a community do? And I read about it because, we're all sort of friends, but on the other hand, competitive with these institutions. But at this time, it should really be a unity and all fight for the same thing. And so maybe I'm still waiting for, I'm waiting for the turmoil and the fire that's lit. I haven't seen it because I don't think it will just get better on its own. It will get stronger out. I think there needs to be some fire first.
All right. So before I will jump, I want to be sure that, are you also asking about how is it possible for the international people to move out of the academia? Okay. The good news is once you're a faculty, it doesn't matter if you're on H-1B, you can still apply for all the R grants. So the really limitation is if you're like J1, then you're limited to get any K awards except K99, as you said. But it's not true for nonprofit organizations and like MDA, MDF, you can go and you can apply. But it is a limitation because now once you go on the market, universities are looking, is there a K award there? Because that means that you have a potential to bring money and be competitive at the NIH level. And of course, this is limited. And I think this is quite common like experience for everybody who's like international doing like science in the US. We are starting from the basement. We have a set of new challenges that, people who are born in the US, they don't have, right? But that's the deal, right? If we want to do science in the United States, we need to overcome this extra set of challenges. And the green card or where like your immigrant status is one of them. Okay.
I have a short, like a story and then a question, and I might get myself in a little trouble with the story, but I got an email that I think was supposed to go to the faculty, and it was someone who had just recently been hired, and it had their CV. And I looked at the CV, and I said to the other grad students in my lab, I was like, guys, look at this. There was like several full pages of grants that this person had applied to unsuccessfully. And I don't know if that's like a normal thing to put in your CV as a researcher, but it encouraged me and the other grad students and simultaneously like impressed me more than any inspirational message from like a successful person, just to see like those several pages of unsuccessful grants with someone that I know was like very successful. Going along with not having a lot of experience being successful is also like maybe we don't have a lot of experience being unsuccessful. And so I was wondering, when you guys run into disappointment or failures or just discouragement, what is the thing that you tell yourself in your mind that helps you get through that and turn it into something productive?
I just think that it's like all narrowing down to disappointment is just part of the life, right? And we might have more disappointment in science and academia than other people have. I definitely see that for myself. I'm building up tolerance for that, which is great because my life is less affected. I metabolize this. It's hurt, whatever is that, like disappointment, hurt, whatever. I metabolize that quicker. I usually talk with someone, and that's totally off the records, because it's just to release the emotions, right? And I give myself time, and it's usually more than I would like that to be, to come back. It's like tapping from the emotional mind to rational mind. It's like first like emotional mind is overtaking everything, right? I'm like hurting, whatever. Once I process that, I have access to my more thinking mind, rational mind, and then I can judge if I can like constructively address some of those things. I think that's the process. And I'm new at this job, but I feel it's like it's a recurring theme. I feel like that will be happening a lot. And honestly, I think there's also a little bit of like power with this. Like when anger comes, it's just strong emotion, which is motivating to action. And I feel sometimes it's good to use it, especially if the reason is good. Sometimes it has to go, right? That depends. And I will pass. I just want to add one more thing to the previous question. I think there's a lot of small pockets of money in multiple places, and those are like relatively easy to reach. And I think that was my strategy. Like I will first grab those low-hanging fruits. And since I started my academic position, I never really complained that I did not have money for the research. And I see my colleagues who are like totally different. No, we need to get this R1 and we need to get it now. And they're like submitting, and then they deal exactly with that, a lot of disappointment constantly, right? And I think the overall like also idea is like, can we do relatively like smaller steps, and can we build up on the success? Can we have those small wins and prepare ourselves for the bigger wins? Because every time when the stakes are high, the reward might be great, but there's also a high risk of like disappointment and losing the battle, right? So I think there's a lot about this strategy. I think I learned that in Maury's lab, how to think more strategically about the career and not necessarily go right after the most shiny thing, just to build up. And that takes time, patience.
Yeah, I have a short answer. Maybe just try to keep doing the work while you apply again, because that's the fun part. And I did that. That's difficult because it all boils down to protected time. And particularly for clinicians, for example, you just get sucked up into clinic. And then if you don't have funding, you have to do more clinic. And then all of a sudden your research career is ended. Oh, and that's, by the way, I did a little bit of, for this meeting, I did look at a publication, a qualitative study on barriers to success in academic neurology research careers that was published last year. And the theme is no protected time, no supportive environment. That's kind of the killer for careers, particularly for women. And so if you find a niche where you can still do the work while you are waiting for funding, or if you do have supportive patients, philanthropy is super important. And it doesn't hurt to talk to your patients about your research and maybe spark their interest in supporting it. Particularly in the current situation, what has helped me keep motivated is that I have patients ask me in the clinical trials or in the studies or even in the clinic, how are you doing? How is this affecting you? And most of them can't say, how can I help? But once in a while, someone can help, and then just pick up that conversation.
I very much second what you just said of the push-pulls in the MD, PhD world of always gravitating you more towards more clinic. But even in the PhD world, to remember that the N of money is still less than the N of people with drive and motivation and intelligence. So being rejected for a grant is not a judgment of you. It may be a motivator. It is certainly something to learn from, but think of it like soccer, that there's going to be missed goals over and over again, and you can't wallow in it too long. You got to pick up and find some other path. And sometimes that other path is very creative, patient philanthropy or other things. But I think that there isn't a lack of people passionate about doing research. I think there's a lack of funding to fund the passionate people.
I was going to say about listing grants that you didn't get funded. I think when you're transitioning from a postdoc to like an assistant professor or from a graduate student trying to get a postdoc position, I think everyone should put down all of the applications they've applied for and the scores they got if they get these scores. So I've been on search committees at universities, and if someone's put in for a Kennedy 9 and got a really good score but didn't get funded, that just shows that you have hustle and that you worked for this, right? And that you know how to actually put together an application. So I think it depends on kind of what stage of career you're in. I don't think that I would put on an app like all of my failed grants. So it would just make me really sad. But the better failed ones, yeah. The ones that were really close to getting, actually, because the difference between, I have an R01, got a 15th percentile on it. The funding line is a 14th percentile. And then maybe the next time it goes in, I'll get a 20th percentile, or maybe the next time I go in, I get a 10th percentile. But there's really no difference between any of those. It's just who read it. So like, I think it's really important that people see that you're actually making an effort to get these, to get funded. And that it's the people who have a woe is me attitude, I've done this 3 times, but they do it 3 times the same way. Those are the ones that kind of end up seeing not like get the grant at some point, right? It's like this, I'm going to change them and use a different strategy and put it into a different area and get it funded, or the people that will be funded at some point.
Yeah, resubmitting. So I have learned that initially when I got these reviews back, I was like, oh, not that much to change, maybe just those 2-3 things, and then put it back in. And my mentor, for example, his philosophy is put it in as best as you can. Always provide the best work ever, because you want people to believe in you that you really always do the best, and not going to quickly put it together and do those 2-3 things. And it will be a different person reviewing it, and they might find new things. So really just look at it as a whole and rewrite it. And even if it takes more time, more effort, but just do the best product.
Yeah, I want to add to that. So do your best job. Now I want to change the position. Now I'm sitting on the review board, right? So I review, of course, I see the grant for MDF, and I see large NIH project grants. And you won't believe, when you have, let's say, 40 or so grants, you can automatically dismiss 6 or 7 all the time because they are hastily put together, there are errors, the margin are crappy. And I'm asking myself, if these folks, right, would spend 2 or 3 more hours putting their best job forward, they would compete with the big boys and girls, but they don't. So maybe the lesson is, right, start early, do your absolutely best job you can do, and share your proposal with mentors. People are willing to review, people are willing to provide you feedback, and then listen to them, right? And go to a version 2 and a version 3, and then submit. But if you do the same thing over and over again, right, you might as well bang your head against the wall.
Hi again. I know you guys been talking about like staying curious and do you think that grab your interest? So my question is, have you guys ever started like a project that you thought was really interesting, and then midway through you're like, why did I do this? Like, how can I stop this? Like, your interest has fell through with the project itself?
I have had that project. Andy knows about that project. A little known metazoan that I worked with for a while. In theory, so I tried to basically work with this metazoan called Trichoplex because they had a version of MBNL and it's a basal metazoan. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so cool. We're going to learn about all these things. And it was horrible because nothing was working. Actually culturing them was not fun. And it was a side project and all these things. So yeah, it was really interesting. But I also think it's important to recognize like when the payoff isn't there. And if it's dividing your focus from something that has legs, right? That is going to go somewhere. And I think in that moment too, also like having the discussion with your mentor and saying, hey, this is not really going where I thought it was. And I don't think it's really working. Like, how do you feel about shifting or refocusing what I'm doing? Or if they have ideas on how to get you out of that rut too. But yeah, I think we've been there.
Actually, I just want to follow up on that because we've been talking about passion, following your passion, and I 100% agree with that. But there's also, as graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, faculty, all these levels, there's places where you have to make very hard decisions and you have to pivot. And so, again, that's using your mentors. And you may make a wrong decision, you may have to backtrack, but I do think doing the same thing over and over again, you're probably not going to get a different result. So even if it's something you're incredibly passionate about, you may have to leave it behind for a while. Hopefully, maybe you can pick it back up. But so be willing to pivot and pivot to a new passion. I think that's really important, being able to pivot and being flexible.
Hi, I have a question for Andy. So maybe you covered it a little bit in your introductory speech, but I was wondering what drove you to apply for CSO positions in like patient foundation specifically with your most recent job switch.
And along with that, what is your, as opposed to maybe working for like a company that works on rare genetic disorders, and along with that, how your day-to-day life is like? What are some of your responsibilities that you work on a lot?
The day-to-day changes day to day. So what made the job really interesting was the convergence, right, of necessary advancements in diagnostics, then a wonderful drug pipeline, right? And lastly, an opportunity to really rethink about the future of clinical trials and clinical registries. Because a disease like DM, right, where we have such variability in symptoms, we have to capture that in terms of the genetic information in registries, and we will have to capture that in terms of the comprehensive natural history in registries. And I think when these three things, if you think about it as a Venn diagram, when we have maximum overlap, we have maximum success in really getting treatments to patients. So from a disease and from an indication, I think it is such an amazing opportunity. Now to my day-to-day. So let me tell you about my most interesting part of the day, and that is being there for patients, being there for industry, and being there for the partner in general. So non-disclosure agreements with all the pharmaceutical partners. And it's really fascinating to see the varying aspects where we as a foundation can help, where we can make connections, where we can facilitate. And these projects, they range from making very simple phone calls and making introductions to really long-term in terms of, for example, planning a scientific session with the FDA or thinking about registry harmonization in the context of the European environment. So it's a really fascinating, very diverse spectrum of responsibilities. I really love my job.
All right, let's give our panel members a round of applause.